welcome to my session. We're going to talk all about hybrid mobile applications and see how we can build them securely today. I hope you're having a great time at the conference. Let me take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Vineeta. I live in Indianapolis in the USA. I've been in the AppSec field for around 10 years. Currently, I'm a security researcher, and as part of my job, I research the latest mobile frameworks and see how they affect mobile security in the current landscape. When I'm not working, I love to do new things. I love to chase the outdoors. Currently, I'm also learning a new dance form. So let's get started. What exactly are hybrid mobile applications? They are mobile apps that are built to run on multiple platforms. Platforms like iOS, Android, um, there is Linux, there's Mac OS, so many more. So the reason these apps are able to work on multiple platforms is because they are built using hybrid mobile frameworks like Flutter, Cordova, Ionic, React Native, and there's so many more in the market right now. All of these frameworks work on the principle of write once and use anywhere. Is that unlike before, when you would build an app per platform, they're called native apps. So when you write a native app, you write the code from scratch, you test it, and you build it only for that platform. But with hybrid mobile frameworks, you write the code just once, you test it just once, and you build it for any platform that you want to support. So this made building mobile applications in the hybrid way extremely popular and really fast because now you cut down your software development time and effort by almost 50%. So these hybrid frameworks became really popular lately, and they work by making a lot of the device capabilities on your mobile phone and their native APIs available to you in the form of modules or libraries. So these libraries are maintained by the framework community or the open source community, and they help you very quickly, just through an API, access that functionality. Now you can write your own module to be able to lift that feature from the device, but these frameworks come shipped with a lot of such useful modules that you can just plug into your app and start building your app. These libraries are usually made available through that framework's package manager. Let's take an example of one. This is a library provided by the Flutter framework. Pub.dev is the package manager of Flutter. And as you can see, this is used to implement biometric authentication for your users in your app. So you would normally go and try to look for the native API on, say, the iOS environment to do biometric authentication. But because of this library, everything is already bundled in for you, and you would just call the authentication API to authenticate your user. So this is why hybrid mobile applications have become very easy to work with and build quickly. But these libraries are at the end of the day coming from an external source. It's code that you do not control. So even though the library does what you need it to do, it has to do that securely. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So we've seen that hybrid apps are popular and that they rely on a lot of libraries, but we do need to ensure that that library is secure. So to help you build your hybrid app, why don't I just give you a list of secure libraries for various functionalities? I could do that, but what if one of the libraries gets outdated? Or what if it's getting associated with a supply chain issue? Or what if it has a CVE in the future? Then the library will not be usable. So let's take an alternate approach today. Let's take this approach. What this means is that if you give a man a fish, he eats just once. But if you teach a man to fish, he eats forever. So we're going to follow a similar approach today and learn how to evaluate libraries by ourselves so that when you're ready to build your application and you're looking at various options, you know which library works best for you and also works in a secure manner without introducing any vulnerabilities in your application. So to do that and to learn how to evaluate libraries, let's take the help of 5 principles of application security today. So the first principle we're going to talk about is called least privilege. And what that means is that less is more, or that when you're building an app, it has to follow a granular permission model. A mobile app needs the user's permission to access a lot of things on the device, like photos or location or contacts. So when you're building an app, it's important that you only work with permissions that are absolutely necessary for your application. For example, assume you're building a music streaming app. And if this app asks the user permission to access the storage on the device, that makes sense. Maybe it wants to store offline data. Or if it asks permission to Bluetooth, that also makes sense because maybe it wants to connect to the speaker. But if your app, the music streaming app, asks permission to the user's location, then it gets suspicious. It's no longer a safe application. And in some cases, you could be violating data privacy laws as well. So it's important that when you're building your app, you know what permissions you need so that when you pick libraries, you can evaluate the library and see if it's asking for permissions that are not necessary for your app. You want to ensure that the library doesn't ask for excess permissions behind your back. Similarly, mobile applications make their data and their functionality available to other apps on the device. So it's important that you follow this principle in those functionalities as well. Android developers should be aware of content providers like intents and broadcasts. And these content providers should also be limited only to applications that you trust. And you want to keep this trusted list of apps to a minimum. And you can limit this content to specific apps of a group that you trust. So when you're using libraries to handle these content providers or permissions, you want to ensure that the library is not forcing any default values or permissions on you, and that you are not stuck with some kind of options that you cannot configure. You can also make use of certain native security controls that the OS provides to ensure that your permissions are handled in a secure manner. Options like one-time permissions or signature-based permissions. The next principle we're going to talk about today is called security by obscurity. What this means is that if the inner workings of your application are hidden from an attacker, then your app is safe. So this principle was long debunked. It's no longer true, but for the sake of mobile applications, let's revisit it and see if it makes sense in the mobile context. So mobile apps are extremely client heavy, which means a lot of the app code and data resides on the client side, which is out of your control. So maybe this principle can be applied to a particular extent. What I mean by that is that all of this code is residing on your mobile, and so it's easily accessible to attackers. So you want to make it really difficult for an attacker to make sense of it. Let's break this down. If you were to release your application binary without any obfuscated code, an attacker could potentially uh, download your app. They could decompile your application without even having an account on the application. They could decompile it and they can understand what is going on inside your application. They can understand and see all the classes, all the functions, and that will help them launch more targeted attacks on your app and on your server. You don't want that. You want to make it really hard for the attacker to understand your code. And to do that, any hybrid app framework that you pick, ensure that it has some obfuscation features and ensure that it obfuscates all the code and not just code of a specific language. You could also make use of code splitting, which is exactly as it sounds. You split up your code into multiple random sized pieces and release it in your binary so that if an attacker does get their hands on it, it's hard for them to put it all together and make sense of it. Now let's talk about data that is on your device. There is data in transit, so any data that you send to your server, you have to ensure that it is transmitted over a secure protocol like HTTPS. So if you're using a library that allows you to make GET and POST requests to your server, ensure that you're using HTTPS URLs and that the library supports you by forcing safe encrypted communication with the server. So what about data at rest, which is residing in the sandbox of your application. It's extremely important that you encrypt any sensitive data that you store on your device. You could also store your data in a secure location on your device, locations that are backed by hardware security like keychain or key store. And when you're going to encrypt your data, and if you're using a library to handle this for you, you want to ensure that the library supports the latest cryptographic algorithms. Any new encryption algorithms or key generation algorithms should be supported by the library, and the library shouldn't force weak algorithms like MD5 or SHA-1 in case you're doing hashing. And any data that you're displaying to the user should also be obscured to protect them from shoulder surfing attacks. So if you're using a library to fetch data and display it to the user, if it is sensitive, ensure that the library that you're using to display this data supports and gives you options to mask that sensitive data. The next principle we'll talk about today is called minimizing the attack surface. What exactly is an attack surface in your mobile app? It is a list of all entry points into your application through which an attacker can launch exploits. So ideally, you want to keep this really minimal, and anything that you're receiving from these entry points should be thoroughly validated. A mobile application has several sources through which data could enter the application. There is the system-wide keyboard and clipboard, for example, and this clipboard is accessible by all applications on the device. So there is a chance that some kind of malicious data is residing on this clipboard. And if you're reading that data directly into your application without any validation, then you could be susceptible to injection type attacks. Another source through which untrusted data could enter your app are called universal links or deep links. Let me give you an example. You know, sometimes when you're browsing on your phone and you click, say, a Facebook link, it will ask you if you want to launch the Facebook app in your device. And that is possible through universal links or deep links. You basically allow another app to invoke a functionality of your application through an external URL. So when you configure such URLs, again, it's very important to limit them and also not launch any sensitive functionalities through universal links. And any input that you're receiving from universal links should be validated. The biggest culprit, in my opinion, in increasing your app's attack surface is the usage of web views. A web view is like having a mini browser page inside your application in which you can load external web content. And these web views and the libraries that help you create web views usually come with a lot of features and web elements to incorporate in your web view. And one such risky component is JavaScript. And JavaScript, when we talk about JavaScript, we have to talk about cross-site scripting. And cross-site scripting is applicable to mobile applications. And it's especially concerning in mobile applications because the JavaScript or the malicious JavaScript that comes in through web views could have access to all of the data in your application's sandbox. And it could also have access to any prior permissions that the user has given your application. So when you create a web view through one of these libraries, it's very important that you know how you're handling your JavaScript. For example, there is a library out there that launches a web view for you, but it turns on JavaScript by default. That is not good because maybe that web view doesn't really need JavaScript. So you want to be safe and ensure that you are turning off these defaults before launching a web view blindly. Again, to minimize any attack surfaces, it's important that whether you use universal links or web views, you are using an appropriate library that allows you to validate any data coming from these sources. The next principle we're going to talk about is called client trust. And what that means is that the mobile app is running on an untrusted environment. Another way to put it is trusted on busted, which means trusted code is running on a busted environment. So the device is controlled by the user, and for all we know, the user could have compromised their device. According to me, there are three types of users. There is the the attacker user who's using your application just to see how they can break it. And then there is the extremely tech-savvy user who has jailbroken or rooted their device and is maybe unknowingly using a malicious app or has downloaded malware. Or they could be the gullible and naive user who has probably clicked on random phishing links and installed malware on the device. So you as an app developer, how can you protect your app, your other users, and your server from such untrusted environments? Let's take an example. Say that the user has downloaded a third-party keyboard that is really fun and they don't want to use the default keyboard that the OS provides. In this case, the user could be using the third-party keyboard to enter sensitive data into your application, say their password or SSN. So when they use a third-party keyboard that could be compromised, an attacker could be listening to this data and harvesting user credentials. So you want to protect your user from such situations, and how you can do that is disable third-party keywords on such sensitive user fields. There are a lot of libraries that will allow you to create forms to receive user data. So you may want to see how you can complement those libraries with security controls like disabling custom keywords. Now, how do you trust the app that you're talking to? For example, how does your mobile app know that it's talking to the right endpoint or the right server on the other end of the network? A lot of mobile apps achieve this using cert pinning or cert validation. With hybrid mobile frameworks, there are a lot of libraries that help do cert pinning for you. So it's important that you know how that cert pinning API works. You want to ensure that it is not a very easily bypassable method of cert pinning. You also want to ensure that the library doesn't it has some controls around disallowing self-signed certificates and other similar vulnerabilities. Now, at the end of the day, hybrid mobile applications are made up of a lot of libraries, and these libraries are coming from third parties. So at the end of the day, they are going to introduce risk in your application. So it's always a great idea to periodically perform source code analysis to ensure that you're not introducing vulnerabilities or licensing issues into your application. And as always, anything coming from third party has to be thoroughly verified. Ensure that it's coming from a trusted builder, a trusted developer, and you may want to ensure that it doesn't have any CVEs or known exploits from that library. The last principle we're going to talk about today is called defense in depth. And what it means is that you need to layer in security controls and layer in multiple controls together to protect your application from the chaining of vulnerabilities. So that if one security control fails, you have another stronger security control behind that one to protect you from such a domino effect. One example of a defense in-depth security control is called jailbreak detection. And what it means is that you want to ensure your application is running in a non-rooted and non-jailbroken detection because non-jailbroken device, because such environments are considered to be more vulnerable to attacks. And to do that, you may be using a library in your hybrid app, and any library that performs jailbreak detection most probably gives you a single API that does the jailbreak detection for you and returns true or false. Now, that is not a very reliable method of during verification, and I'm sure any hacker who's listening to this right now knows that it's extremely trivial to use tools like Frida to attach onto the application process and bypass such a Boolean-based detection method. They can just switch true to false, false to true, and trick your app into believing that it is not running in a jailbroken environment. So such kind of verification is called event-based verification, and it is not very secure. Whether it is jailbreak detection or biometric authentication, it's important that you use result-based authentication or verification, because in result-based, you get a type as a return value and not true or false. And when you get a type, it's harder for Frida tools to be able to spoof that result. Some other defense in depth strategies include forcing your application to run only in the latest OS version. And this is because the latest OS versions usually have the latest security updates, thereby protecting your applications that further mile. You also want to ensure your application is resilient in a broken environment in case any reverse engineering attacks are performed on your app. So you want to ensure that you do not allow any debuggers to attach to your application process. And you want to ensure that you don't leave any debugging code or developer code inside your application. A lot of hybrid frameworks will strip debug code before you make your release build, but not all of them do it. So it's important that you do your homework and ensure that they actually do strip that debug code. And as always, do not hard code any credentials or sensitive data in your application. So to summarize, let's see what we learned today. When you're building a hybrid application, it's extremely important that you follow good, secure coding practices and that any library you pick, you have to scrutinize them very deeply because it's not just important to check and see if they're doing what they need for your application, but that they also do it securely. So ensure that the library is being kept up to date. Any security issues are immediately fixed. Keep an eye and see that there are no CVEs or supply chain issues associated with that library. And you also want to make sure that these libraries are exposing all of the security controls that the native OS may provide. And you want to make sure that they're staying up to date with the latest native OS APIs. Because sometimes what happens is that the native APIs get updated with an OS update, but the library doesn't follow through until much later. So you're going to miss out a lot on the native updates, and you want to ensure that the library is held accountable and is giving you the same options. And as always, do not forget that the native OS comes with a lot of security controls of its own, and you want to make sure that you're taking advantage of them or ensuring that they work and complement any of the libraries that you're using to implement security measures. So with that, I will stop and see you soon for the question answer round. Thank you.